Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Cape Falcon Kayak, and welcome to another video in our small boat camping series where we show you how to camp efficiently out of skin-on-frame kayaks and canoes. Although honestly, this is going to be useful for anyone who's interested in learning how to pack lighter and faster and go camping without sacrificing too much comfort. So first up here, if you haven't watched the first video in this series, make sure you go back and do that now, because that's where I give you a general overview of all the specific items that you're going to see in these later videos, and we pack them into one of my skin-on-frame sea kayaks so you can see how this whole thing ultimately comes together. Also, if you find this series useful, the only thing I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe button and consider building one of our skin-on-frame boats or potentially buying your next piece of paddling gear from us. All right, so what we're going to be doing here today is unpacking everything that I normally carry in the bow bag of my sea kayak or my solo canoe, and this includes my tent, my sleeping bag, my sleeping mat, and I was originally going to include all the clothes that I bring with me as well, which are also in this bag, but the first editing pass on that video came in at a little bit over a half hour, so I think we're going to save that for a future video. Now, keep in mind, the products that I'm about to show you are my own personal favorites, so if you have your own suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. Just as a general philosophy, I tend to gravitate towards mid-weight camping gear because it tends to be less expensive and more durable than the ultralight stuff. However, there are certainly circumstances where ultralight gear makes sense, so I'm going to show you some of the super light alternatives in case you're camping out of something really low volume like a whitewater kayak or a Greenland kayak or a pack canoe. So just like I showed in the first video when we were packing the kayak, the gear bag that I'm using here is a combination float bag / gear bag that's made by Track Kayaks. These come in a couple different sizes, and I'm not going to talk about this in this video because I'm going to make a separate video talking about the advantages and the disadvantages of the different options, and also we're going to talk about sea socks as well. Now, moving on to sleeping bags, my recommendation for general purpose kayak camping is always going to be a 600 to 800 fill down sleeping bag with a 20-degree rating. And the reason I go for that is because the lower fill, which is a measure of the loft of the feathers, tends to be less expensive. And also the 20-degree rating is going to be just fine in the summer where you can unzip it and just drape it over for you. But also in the winter, if you need to, you can layer up inside of your sleeping bag to get a little bit of extra warmth. Now, the bag that I have inside of here is the Kelty Cosmic 800 fill. The one that I've chosen here is the longer version, not because I'm taller, but just because it has a little bit more side room in the legs. And one of my main criticisms about ultralight mummy bags is sometimes they take material out of the leg portion, which means that on a cold night, if you need to, you can't pull your knees up. Now, this is definitely not the highest quality sleeping bag. The zipper does not have a zipper guard on it, which means that it frequently catches this fabric, which means that sooner or later you're going to be patching little holes. I've definitely seen feathers come out of it. The down that's inside of it is not completely 800 fill down. It's actually a mixture of down and synthetic fibers, which is why they can build this at the price point that they have. And overall, it weighs 2.5 pounds, which by backpacking sleeping bag standards is a little bit heavy for a 20-degree bag. So you're probably wondering why I would buy this if it's really not the highest quality sleeping bag, and that's just because the price is incredible. At $180 for what is the equivalent of a 650 fill down mummy bag with a decent amount of space, I just don't think you can beat that. And also it has to do with the way that I use my sleeping bag, because I'm not just taking this out a couple weeks a year on camping trips. I'm actually sleeping in this when I'm camping out of my Jeep for about 4 months every year. And I just feel like if I was to buy an ultralight backpacking sleeping bag to save that extra space and be a little bit warmer, it wouldn't be a very good value to ruin that by sleeping in it every night 4 months out of every year. However, if you do want to save a little bit more space and you have the money to spend, you could get something like this right here. So this when I bought it was a top of the line ultralight backpacking sleeping bag. This is a Sierra Designs Cloud. It's got a really thin but very durable outer shell. It's filled with 900 fill goose down, which is, you know, as lofty as goose down gets. But I've actually only used this twice. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I don't want you to make the same mistake that I did if you decide to spend a lot of money on an ultralight backpacking sleeping bag. So, good things about this is that it's super warm, it has a ton of loft, it only weighs 1 3/4 pounds, and it packs down super small, and all that is great. But the bad thing about it is that it only has a 3/4 length zipper, and it's really narrow in the leg area. And for me personally, I can't stand being restricted in the leg area, and also on hot days, I like to be able to open my sleeping bag all the way and just drape it over me like a quilt. And so I bought this because I got a good deal on it, but ultimately it ended up not being a good deal because I don't like the sleeping bag and I never use it. And so if I was to go out tomorrow and buy what I think is the best ultralight backpacking sleeping bag out there, I would get the Feathered Friends Hummingbird Ultralight. I mean, that's going to set you back a serious chunk of change, but Feathered Friends has an incredible warranty and repair policy. And also, if you purchase a bag from them, you get it, you crawl inside it, and it doesn't fit, you can send it back to them for a return or an exchange. Their stuff is sewed in the United States, and also their feathers are ethically sourced. And if you happen to be in Seattle, you could actually just go to their store, crawl inside one of their bags. So anyways, moving on to sleeping mats. Lots of different options for sleeping mats out there. Just like with the rest of my gear, I tend to go with medium weight stuff because it's less expensive and it's more durable than going with ultralight backpacking stuff. And my favorite sleeping mat for the last 20 years has been these X-Ped mats here. They come in a variety of different weights. This happens to be the one that's currently called the Dura. It used to be called the SynMat 7. And this is what that looks like fully inflated. Just starting out with the features on this, one of the cool things about the reboot of this particular mat is they've made it carbon neutral. It's stamped right on the side here. I'm not sure what method they've done that by. Hopefully it's legit. Also, this is all recycled 75 denier polyester fabric. The inside of this is actually filled with a little bit of synthetic insulation, which is nice, keeps you a little bit warmer, and it's a fairly thick mat. Now, coming in a little bit closer, I want to show you guys the inflation method on this, because even though this is pretty common these days with air mats, if you haven't bought a mat in a while, you might not be familiar with it. So basically what I've got here is this really thin yellow synthetic bag that comes with the mat. And what we're going to do is we're going to loft a little bit of air into it like this, and then just quickly close up the top, just like you're closing up a dry bag. Go ahead and clip it together here. And then on the other end, it's just got this little stopper that opens up, and then there's a one-way flapper valve that you can open right here on the mat. And you can plug these two together, and then you just squeeze this, and really quickly and easily it blows up this mat. And the reason that you want to do this as opposed to just blowing with your lungs is, one, it's a lot harder to do with your breath, and two, you don't want to introduce a bunch of moisture into the synthetic insulation in there. Now, another cool thing about this inflation port here is because this is backed up with a one-way flapper valve, if you're laying on your mat and it's a little bit too rigid for you, instead of having to get off the mat, deflate it a little bit, and just hope that you guess the right amount of air to take out, you can actually reach underneath the mat by feel and open up this port while you're laying on it. And then you can just use this little plastic tool that's integrated right here to just lightly push on the flapper valve, and that lets you fine-tune the comfort of the mat while you're laying on top of it. Now, as far as the shaping of these come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. The one that I choose is the medium length, which is 6 feet long because I'm a medium-sized person, but I also choose the wider width, which is 25 inches wide, just because it's really nice to sleep on. Now, if you wanted to save a little bit more weight but still maintain the durability of this heavier mat here, you could go with the 20-inch wide version. This version weighs just a little bit over 2 pounds. The 20-inch wide version weighs just a little bit under 2 pounds. And then also there's the possibility of going with a double mat. They make 2-person square mats, which is basically just 2 of these basically hooked together. And they also make a 2-person tapered mat that fits really well inside of backpacking tents that have a tapered foot area. And that's something to remember when you're purchasing your gear, because if you're going to be touring out of an ultralight backpacking tent, you want to make sure that it's going to be compatible with your mats, because if you try to take 2 wide square mats and put them into a tent that has a tapered foot area, obviously that's not going to fit, and you're going to have to buy new mats, or you're going to have to get a different tent. Now, if you're someone who's going to be doing a lot more backpacking and is only kayak and canoe camping on occasion, in that case, that's where I think their ultralight mats start to make more sense. They've got another version of this called the Ultra that shaves off about 30% weight and about 50% pack size, but the fabric is only about half as thick, which means that it's not going to be nearly as durable as this thicker mat. However, the nice thing about the Xped mats is they come with a repair kit that is built into the sleeve for these mats. So if you're just kayak and canoe camping, I would go with this. I think this is the best value. Backpackers might have a different calculation. All right, so moving on to sleeping shelters, what I've done here is lined up 4 different options, and I want to talk about the circumstances under which I would use each one. So starting out on this end, this is just a simple silicone nylon tarp. It's got really long Dyneema guy lines, and this is meant to be set up over a string that's strung between 2 trees, or you can set it up on hiking poles. And the nice thing about a silicone nylon tarp is this is your lightest option. This is less than 1 pound. The less nice thing about it is that it doesn't have any mosquito protection. It doesn't have a floor underneath it. It's just basically something to keep the rain off you if there's moisture. And so whether or not this is going to work for you just depends on your situation. If you're in a place where it's not going to be really rainy, it's the middle of summer, there's not a lot of bugs, and you're looking for the smallest and lightest possible shelter, these are a great way to go. Moving on to this jungle hammock here. This is called a Hennessy hammock. There's a couple different jungle hammock companies. I like the Hennessy's the best personally. This is their ultralight backpacker asymmetrical. It comes in at just a little bit under 2 pounds. And the nice thing about a jungle hammock is that it hangs off of the ground. There's no other way to set it up. And that gives you good airflow all the way around. And where this is going to be super useful is if you're on a camping trip in the tropics. Because if you bring a backpacker tent with you and you set it up on the coast in Costa Rica, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, you are going to roast alive in your tent and you're not going to get any sleep. And another cool thing about a jungle hammock, if you're camping in a hot climate, is that you don't need to have a sleeping mat to be comfortable, so that just saves you additional weight. Now, moving on to backpacking style tents, this tent happens to be the MSR Hubba Hubba. I bought this about 15 years ago, and this is still a popular tent, but personally, I haven't been that impressed with it. I feel like the Hubba Hubba design doesn't save that much weight over a traditional cross pole tent, and just having that single arched pole in the middle makes it inherently weak. And another problem with this is that it had a polyurethane coating on the Rainfly. And anytime you've got polyurethane on the Rainfly or the tent floor, after 4 or 5 years, it's going to start to crack and it's going to start to flake off, and then it's going to start to leak. And so my personal advice for medium weight backpacking tents like this that weigh about 3.5 pounds is spend the money to get something that is silicone nylon as opposed to polyurethane coated fabric of whatever type, because it's going to last a lot longer. And my personal recommendation, and the next tent that I'm going to be buying here very soon for a 3.5 pound backpacking style tent, would be the Sling Fin Portal 2. And the reason I believe that is because I just purchased the Sling Fin Indis tent, which is literally the most well-constructed tent I have ever owned in my life. And I'm going to set this up in front of you here in a few minutes and show you what I like about it. But first, let's just talk about this category of tent in general. Basically, this is a tent that weighs 5.5 pounds as opposed to the 3.5 pound backpacker tents. And it kind of straddles the niche between backpacking and car camping. And the advantage to going with a bigger, heavier tent like this is, one, it can be a lot more comfortable because these usually are a little bit bigger because they don't have to cut every last ounce. But also, it can be either a lot less expensive or it can be a lot more durable. So if you want to spend around $200 to $300, there's a ton of good options out there. You're not necessarily going to get a tent that's going to last a whole lot longer than a good backpacking tent because they're going to be cutting corners on stitching, materials, zippers, and coatings. However, if you are willing to spend a lot more money, this particular tent I think costs me around $550, you can get a tent that is big and comfortable and also extremely durable because it's going to be using all the same high-tech materials as a good backpacking tent, but that stuff is just going to be thicker and stronger. So taking a look at this tent, once again, this is the Sling Fin Indis 2. And while I'm walking you through this, what I want you to pay attention to isn't exactly this particular tent, because the tent that you choose is going to depend on your needs. What I really want you to focus on is just the quality of everything and how well thought out all the features on this are. Now, speaking of this particular tent, the Indis 2 is a more budget-friendly version of their high-end 4-season tent, which is called the Crossbow 2. So the reason that Liz and I decided to get this particular tent is because we're doing more camping out of our Jeep these days in the middle of the desert than we're doing on the water. And so for us, having a tent with a solid inner wall is super important to prevent blowing dust and blowing sand from coming into the tent. And also, we're willing to spend the extra couple pounds of weight to get a tent that is significantly more durable. And whether that's the right equation for you just depends on how you're going to be camping. So coming in a little bit closer, we've got a silicone nylon Rainfly, which is the longest lasting option. It has all the normal stakeout points down below that you would expect from any quality tent, but it also has all of these guy line loops up higher. There are 10 of these total that you can hook on extra lines. So if you find yourself in a really windy situation, you can stabilize your tent a lot better. Now, just to give you an idea of how well this is constructed, just take a look at this corner attachment for the Rainfly. We've got an extra nylon reinforcing patch behind this. You've got another reinforcing patch in front of it, which connects to this fairly heavy-duty little plastic buckle. And then that straps down to this carabiner right here, which replaces what is usually just a side clip buckle on most of my other tents. And then that goes through this aluminum ring. And so this whole attachment is way stronger than anything I've seen before, which means that you can really crank down on it without risking ripping out your stitching if you want to tighten your Rainfly. And you can see we've got a similar situation at the bottom front edge of the vestibule. And then coming up a little bit further along the front of the vestibule here, you've got those same little Velcro tabs that you would expect on any tent. It's backed up by a zipper, but what they've done to manage ventilation here is kind of clever. They send the tent with a couple of these little struts that have Velcro tabs on them, and you can put one tab right here and one tab right here. And that's going to hold the Rainfly open a little bit. That way you can get much better ventilation without compromising your rain protection. So this is what it looks like with the Rainfly off. It's just a really simple cross-pull design, which in my opinion has always been the smartest and the strongest design for any tent. They've got an additional third pull coming over the ridge here. That's nothing new. Tents have had this forever. But what Sling Fin has done differently is they've extended this pull out a little bit further. And what that does when you have the Rainfly attached is it pushes the front edge of the vestibule out more. It gives you a little bit more room, and it also makes it less likely that wind is going to blow your wet Rainfly back against the wall of the tent. And then something that's just kind of a nice touch is that they give you a little splint with the tent. So if you ever end up breaking one of these poles while you're out on the trail or out on the water, you can at least do a temporary repair until you get back to civilization. Now, you can see that this particular tent is a solid wall tent, and what that does is in the winter, if you're using this as a 4-season tent, it can keep you a little bit warmer. But also, if you're camping where there's a lot of blowing sand and dust, like down in the Baja Desert, or I don't know, maybe you're going to Burning Man, Having a solid wall tent is absolutely essential. If you just have mesh, your entire tent is going to end up full of grit. This particular material is a breathable ripstop nylon, so even if you have this fully sealed up, you're still going to be getting a little bit of airflow. But if you're not actively in the middle of a dust storm, you're probably better off just opening the front door a little bit. And the reason we can do this is because this is actually a double door tent. It's got this outer door here, which is solid, and then this inner door here has a separate zipper, and this is made out of mesh. And that inner door extends all the way to the bottom here, so you can open this all the way up, get a good view, get some good airflow, but still be protected from mosquitoes. Now, speaking of zippers, this tent has a super burly zipper because it's designed as a heavy-duty tent. Obviously, the lighter backpacking tent is going to be a little bit smaller than this, but something I want to point out that they've done on all their tents that's really cool is they've added some backup zipper pulls here, and the reason for that is the zipper pull is usually the first thing to fail on any tent, and that often is the thing that makes you end up replacing it. So they figured when people end up breaking a zipper pull, they can just carefully remove it, and then they can cut this little strap right here, and then we've got two brand new fresh zipper pulls, which could save your zipper and get you a few more years of life out of your tent. And they've also done this on the inner door zipper and on the Rainfly zippers as well. Now, heading inside the tent here, you can see this is a pretty spacious tent. It's 51 inches wide, 7.5 feet long. It's obviously not an ultralight backpacking tent because it wasn't designed to be one, but if you don't need the ultralight weight of a backpacking tent, it is nice to have the extra length and width and headroom. Now, taking a look at the things I really like in here, the first one is the pockets are perfectly laid out. So for example, instead of having a full length pocket across the head area here, which is just going to cause that part of the tent to sag down onto your head, instead we've got these two little pockets in the corner. And if you think about it, what's the very last thing you're normally going to do before you go to bed? If you've got a phone, you're probably going to want to put your phone somewhere close by. Maybe you were reading your Kindle, you could slide that in there as well. You want somewhere where you can put your headlamp, where you can get your hands on it really easily. And then if you wear glasses, that's what this brilliant little pocket right here is for, because you can slide this in there by itself and it's not going to get scratched up with these other items. And then if you wake up in the dark, immediately all you've got to do is reach towards the corner of the tent and you've got your hands on everything you need. And then coming up a little bit, you can see it's got another mesh pocket up here. And the reason I love this is because if you don't have one of these, you're going to be hanging a tent hammock, and tent hammocks are always getting in the way of your headroom and they're always dropping stuff on you. So we've got this pocket here, and then coming across to the other side of the tent, you've got another big mesh pocket overhead. So with both of these, I don't see any reason you'd need to purchase a separate tent hammock. And then coming down to the foot area right here, this is where we have a gigantic mesh pocket, because I mean, who cares if there's stuff kind of pushing down here, because that's where your feet are. Now, also notice these little loops right here. And there's also loops down in the corner, and those aren't actually attachment points. Those are intended for guy lines. You can get cross lines to go in here and tighten them up, and that's going to dramatically stiffen your tent. I mean, and if you combine these with the extra guy lines on the outside, this thing could probably withstand some kind of hurricane. Now, of course, there's nothing saying that you can't hang stuff from all these points in here. You've got 4 of them up on the roof up here. And then just because I didn't mention this specifically before, this tent does have a door on both sides of the tent. Both sides are set up identically. You've got the outer full panel and then you've got the inner mesh panel. So overall, this is just a really well thought out piece of gear. I mean, as a designer myself, I really appreciate when I see somebody that's taken the time to really obsess over every little detail. It's also worth mentioning that Sling Fin is really big on modularity. You can get heavier duty poles for a lot of their tents. Some of their solid wall tents also have optional mesh bodies for summer camping, and Sling Fin also has a really good warranty. All right, guys, so I think that's pretty much it for my video here talking about sleeping bags, sleeping mats, and tents for small boat camping. Like I said in the beginning, if you're an experienced camper and you have your own recommendations, please leave those in the comments below, because in addition to my own knowledge here in the videos, I think it would be really cool if the comment section on these videos could also be a resource for people who are just getting into this kind of camping. So Anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. As usual, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also, make sure you check out our website, capefalconkayaks.com, where we have skin-on-frame building video courses, plan sets, and various free skin-on-frame resources. You can also find us on Instagram, @CapeFalconBuilds, where we post photos and videos of whatever we're working on in the shop or whatever we're testing out on the water. And you can find that same content on the Cape Falcon Kayak Facebook page as well. So that's it for now. Take care. Be safe on the water. I will see you next time.